Hello, class. Hope you're having a good day today. I thought we would introduce the topic of foreign exchange markets here tonight or today. Um, Talk about how this market, which is the largest market in the world, by the way, larger than any stock market, certainly bond markets, any other market, the Forex, foreign exchange, the Forex market is the largest market in the world. It's around the world. There's no real, there are centers of activity, but there's no real particular center of the Forex market. Foreign exchange is the market where currencies are traded. Okay, so we think of currencies like any other good. Uh, Currency for, say, the British pound can be bought and sold in the Forex market. That particular currency will be priced in other currencies. And so you're talking about currencies that are traded in terms of other currencies. So there's lots of different currencies. There's a few major currencies. We think of the euro, the yen, the pound, the British pound, certainly the dollar, the Swiss franc, and some others, that aren't, some others I'm not thinking of, but then others that maybe aren't quite so important, like the Brazil real and Argentine dollar and so forth. There's a list of these in your book. There's a bunch of them. But if you're going to, as a citizen of the world, if you're going to buy or sell goods or services to people in other countries, you need to interact in the foreign exchange market. Certainly, if you're going to buy, say, if you're an American, you're going to buy a Jaguar, say, from Great Britain. Ultimately, those dollars will have to be converted to British pounds. If you're going to buy French wine from France, the dollars that are offered by the American will have to be converted to euros. You may have to do the conversion yourself if you're going to travel overseas and do much traveling, then you want to have that currency on your person to travel. So you may, before you embark on a voyage overseas or what have you, you may want to go to the bank. Lots of banks offer foreign exchange, but you may want to convert your dollars to, again, to euros or what have you. If you're going to Switzerland, which is not in what's called the Eurozone, by the way, most of the countries in Europe are in the European Union, but not all countries in the European Union are in what's called the Eurozone. The Eurozone is a subset, a large subset of the European Union that shares the same currency, particularly or namely the euro. But, let's see, Denmark, I believe, is in the European Union and they use the kroner or the krone. And Great Britain, well, Great Britain's left the European Union, but they have their own currency, the British pound, pound sterling. Switzerland has the franc and so forth. But at any rate, the principles we're going to learn here are going to be independent of any particular country you may travel to or what have you, or maybe a citizen of. So at any rate, again, there's actually trillions of dollars worth of currencies traded on the Forex market every day. It's kind of hard to believe it's that large, but it is very large. So again, the foreign exchange market is where currencies are traded and they are priced in other currencies. So let's give some definition to what we're going to be talking about briefly here tonight. Let me just put this up here. The foreign exchange market, okay, FEM, is the interaction of private supply and private demand in a currency. This is just an example here. For example, e.g., you might trade dollars for pounds in the Forex market. You might trade euros for yen in the Forex market, okay? So if you're a French citizen, you want to go to Japan, before you go, you might want to buy yen or trade your euro for yen. Or if you're going to buy, if you're to buy goods and services or assets from another country, you need to convert your country to that country's unit of account. Okay, so we're going to consider a situation with only two countries in the world just to make things simple for us. We're going to just suppose for a moment that the United States and Great Britain are the only two countries in the world. So we're going to use some terminology here. The demand for the pound, okay? That's a symbol for the pound. And this is the private demand. So the private demand for the UK pound is the demand, say, by Americans for these three things here: UK goods, services, and assets. Those are things that the United Kingdom offers to the rest of the world. They're people who offer those things are going to want to be paid in pounds. That's the domestic currency. So this would be the demand for the private demand for pounds. The private supply of pounds would be really what exists because of the demand by UK citizens for US goods, services, and assets. Okay, so either one of these, say, if you think for a moment, UK citizens want to buy American stuff, then they're going to bring their pounds, they're going to supply pounds to the foreign exchange market and trade those for dollars. So again, the supply of pounds is really, it's a derived supply, if you will, or demand here. It's driven by the demand. The supply of pounds is driven by the demand by UK citizens for US goods, services, and assets. The demand for pounds is driven by the demand by Americans for UK goods, services, and assets. So there's kind of an equivalence here we could make here between demand and supply. The demand for pounds, private demand, is what P is going to represent here. We also have a demand by the government or the central bank, and we're going to set that to the side. But we're going to think of the private demand for a currency. So the private demand for British pounds is equivalent to the private supply of dollars in the Forex market, because the reason pounds are demanded is because Americans want to buy British stuff. And the only way they do that is by delivering dollars to the Forex market to exchange for pounds. Likewise, the demand for dollars, the private demand for dollars, is equal to the private supply of pounds. Why is that? It's because the people who demand dollars here will be on the Forex market, British or UK citizens who want to buy American stuff. So what they do is they supply pounds to the foreign exchange market to exchange for dollars, with which they will purchase American goods. So these two things are the same, okay? When we talk about increasing, well, we have demand and supply curves here in a minute in these markets, and these curves can increase and decrease just like you learned in your Principles of Micro course for different reasons. But there's a symmetry here that is important. When we talk about an increase in the demand for pounds, that's the same thing as a supply for an increase in the supply of dollars. And likewise, an increase in the supply of pounds is a reflection of, or another side of the same coin here. It's driven by the demand, increased demand for dollars. Okay. So think about, again, citizens of two different countries. If one wants to buy the goods and services of the other country, that first citizen has to offer their domestic currency to someone who will exchange it for the foreign currency. And so one that's supplied by a domestic country is demanded by the foreign country and so forth. So I hope that makes sense here. Okay. Okay, so what we're going to do next here is I'm going to explain this, a market for one of these currencies, say the UK pound, okay? And we're going to use the supply and demand graphs like we're used to using in our micro econ course. So before we get to that, I need, I guess, to kind of explain what we mean by an exchange rate. So let's go to the camera again and talk about an exchange rate. So I'm going to talk about the market here for pounds. British, UK pounds. I guess it's the United Kingdom. I use this symbol here. Okay, so again, we're thinking about a world in which there are only two countries. So there's a couple of exchange rates that we can think about here. For a UK citizen, they can price their own currency in terms of dollars. So we might say that there are $2 per pound. Okay, per means divide, right? This is one way of expressing the exchange rate. The exchange rate is $2 per pound. Equivalently, we could say that the exchange rate is £1 per $2. Okay. All right. So the idea is it depends on what you want to do as to which of these exchange rates are important, say, to a citizen of one of these two countries. If you're a British citizen and you have pounds on your person and you want to convert those to dollars, then you want to work with this form of the exchange rate. Suppose a Brit citizen, a UK citizen rather, UK cit here has 100 pounds on their person. Okay, so if they have 100 pounds, then they're going to want to work with this exchange rate, not with this one. Okay, they want to take this one and multiply this by 100 pounds so that the pounds will cancel. Okay, so 100 pounds is equal to $200. You're not going to be able to convert 100 pounds to dollars by using this exchange rate. You see, it's the US citizen, okay, who has maybe, let's just say, $200 would want to use this exchange rate to convert their dollars to pounds before they buy a UK good or service or travel to the United Kingdom to buy things over there. So you'll take the $200 here and the dollars will cancel, won't they? So you use dimensional analysis here so that your units cancel and you get 200 pounds. I'm sorry, you get 100 pounds, don't you? 100 pounds. So, 100 pounds is this equivalent to $200, but which exchange rate you work with is really depends on who you are and what you want to do. And so we have names for these two different exchange rates. From the point of just say a UK citizen, first off, if they're, remember, these are the two exchange rates here. If their domestic currency unit is on top, we call that a direct exchange rate, okay? Or a direct quote on their currency, okay? Turn this back up. Okay, here we are. I think my tech problem solved here. So for a UK citizen, their domestic currency is on top. So this would be called a direct exchange rate for a UK citizen. Okay, so if you're a UK citizen, this exchange rate where their domestic currency is on top is said to be direct. It's a direct exchange rate. The other one would be an indirect. Okay, so this one right here is a direct exchange rate for a UK citizen. This one here would be a direct exchange rate for a US citizen. Okay, so if your domestic currency is on top, it's a direct exchange rate. If the other country's exchange or unit of account is on top, it's an indirect exchange rate. So for an American who wants to convert dollars to British pounds, they want to work with their indirect exchange rate. So notice we had $200 here. They want to convert to pounds. They want to work with the exchange rate that has their domestic currency on the bottom. And so that'll convert their currency to the other, or their quantity to the other currency. So from dollars to pounds. So I hope that makes sense. So again, if the domestic currency is on top, you have a direct exchange rate. If the foreign currency is on top, you have an indirect exchange rate. If you want to convert your currency to the foreign currency, you want to work with the indirect exchange rate. Okay, so with that out of the way, we know how to price one currency in terms of another. And so now we can look at the supply and demand curves like we would in any other market. So I think we'll talk about the market for UK pounds. And, you got a vertical price axis, a horizontal quantity axis. The price axis is always the price of the commodity, right? And so in this case, in the market for pounds, we're gonna price pounds in terms of, say, the dollar or some other currency. Okay, to talk about, again, here, our simplified world is that there's only two countries in the world anyway. We're setting every other country aside, and so we're looking at Great Britain and the United States. So here we go. So I'm going to talk here again about the market for UK pounds. Okay, so the market for pounds. And just like any other market, there's a price axis and a quantity axis. So this is going to be the quantity of pounds. And this is going to be the price of pounds in terms of dollars. So it's going to be an exchange rate where you have the pound priced in terms of dollars. Okay. So you're going to have both a supply and demand curve. Let's do the supply curve first. You're going to have a supply curve in this diagram here. And we're going to talk about the private supply. We're not going to look at the official supply provided by the central bank or the government. We're looking primarily here, and we're going to relate this to the balance of payments in a minute, but we're going to relate this to what's going on with the current account balance and the finance account balance. Okay, but this is the supply, private supply of pounds. And so we can put some prices on this. Say, for instance, here, this would be perhaps $1 per pound. So if you're going to price pounds in terms of dollars, you're going to do it in the same way you would price gasoline in terms of dollars. Okay, so here's the commodity, is pounds. So when I talk about the market for pounds, that's the commodity. So you want to keep this straight this way. You want to think about any other commodity market. When you price a commodity in terms of, say, dollars, it would be gallons, it'll be dollars per gallon. You're going to have dollars on top, right? So if you don't talk about so many gallons per dollar, you talk about the price of gasoline as being $3 per gallon, not 1/3 of a gallon per dollar. Okay, so you're gonna, for the price of this commodity, if you will, pounds instead of gasoline, you're gonna have dollars on top. Okay, so we're gonna work with the exchange rate in this form with dollars on top. So we're an American, we want to buy and sell pounds. Then for an American, this is a direct exchange rate. Okay, for a UK citizen, this would be the indirect exchange rate. But you want to keep that straight when you start looking at the market, okay, for any particular currency. So in this case, you have this private supply of pounds. That's the commodity here, if you will. And what we note is that really, as uh, the price of pounds increases in terms of dollars, so maybe this is $2 now per pound, there's going to be more pounds offered to the Forex market. Okay. At a low price per pound, perhaps there's only 20 units or 20 pounds, let's just say, provided to the Forex market. Here, there's 120. Just these may be units of a billion pounds or what have you. Okay. This could be in billions. I don't know. Okay. It doesn't really matter for one here. Okay. So the idea is, if you think about it just a second, if we increase the price per pound, then American goods are cheaper to U.S. citizens. If we go this way, okay, in other words, which is a result of going up in the price for a pound. If the price of a pound goes up, there's going to be more pounds supplied. Why is that? Why is it when the price goes up from $1 per pound to $2 per pound, there's going to be an increase in the quantity of pounds supplied? Well, that's because American goods are cheaper. Okay, American goods become cheaper to UK citizens. Okay. And so if American goods are cheaper to UK citizens, then the UK cits are going to want more dollars. Well, how do they get more dollars? They supply more pounds. Okay. So, if something in the United States is priced at $1, then it takes $1. It takes 1 pound here at this point right here. You have parity at this point. That's what that's called. $1 equals 1 pound. If something's priced, maybe it's just a little fuzzy toy here, little animal here, and it has a price tag on it. It says $1. Well, guess what? Right here, British citizens are looking at that and say, that looks like a pretty good deal to me, because to them it costs 1 pound. Okay. But guess what? If now the exchange rate is $2 per pound, that's another way of saying 1 pound per $2, or a half a pound equals $1. This thing now is not only just like it was initially equal to 1 pound. It's no longer 1 pound. It's now a half a pound. Okay. If $2 equals 1 pound, then 1 pound, the exchange is a half of a dollar. Is half a pound equals $1. If $2 equals 1 pound, then half of a pound equals $1. And so American goods, this good has just become cheaper. Okay, it takes fewer pounds, only half a pound. And so more British citizens are going to want these things here. So they're going to offer dollars to the Forex market, or sorry, pounds to the Forex market to get dollars in greater abundance here. Okay. So you have an upward sloping supply, private supply of pounds. When the price goes up, for any other reason, you have an upward sloping supply curve for a commodity. Okay. All right. So more people are supplying the commodity because they can get more for it. Okay, so let's look at the demand. Okay, so I want to look at the same situation here. We got E with pounds priced in terms of dollars. And you have a demand curve, and a claim it slopes downward like this. This is the private demand for pounds. Again, we're looking at the market for pounds. And we're saying that there's more pounds demanded at a lower price than at a higher price. And in a sense, that's because of, like you would have with any other commodity here, When the price goes down, people want more of it. But what's happening here, okay, is say the price goes down, okay, $2 per pound falls to $1 per pound. In that case, we're saying that the pound is depreciating. Okay, the pound is getting cheaper relative to the dollar, so the pound is depreciating. Conversely, we could say the dollar is appreciating. Okay, make sure you get that right. But here the pound is depreciating, not devaluing, by the way. Don't use that term. We'll have to use that later when we talk about fixed exchange rates and managed exchange rates. What we have in the world are floating exchange rates. That's what exists today for the most part in the major countries of the world. I'll talk about that in just a minute, making myself a note here to do that. Okay, believe it or not. So, but at any rate, if the pound becomes cheaper, then that's called a depreciation or a depreciation. The currency is depreciating here. So if the pound gets cheaper, I claim that more people want pounds. Why is that? Because British goods now are cheaper to Americans. British goods or UK goods, I use those interchangeably here, are cheaper to Americans. You see, the price of your exports in foreign currencies will drive the amount of your exports and also the amount of your imports. Net exports, that's one of those components to gross domestic product, is hugely determined by exchange rates. And in this case here, say if the price of the pound falls, that means something that was originally worth, here's this fuzzy animal again, but now it's in the UK. It's no longer in the US, but it cost £1. Okay, so originally that's equal to $2. Americans look at that and they go, nah. Now it's priced at $1 and they say, I'll buy. Okay, that's what's happening when the price falls from $2 a pound to $1 a pound. There's more pounds demanded on the Forex market. So instead of 20 billion in a day, perhaps there's 120 billion quantity of pounds. So Americans want more pounds, okay? Americans want more pounds. They can buy more of these fuzzy animals here. How are they going to do that? Well, they're going to supply dollars, but we'll get to that in a minute. But they want more pounds. So there's an increased demand for pounds here. So you see the symmetry here, I hope. Okay. If the pound appreciates in value, that is, it goes from $1 to $2, there's going to be more pounds supplied. More people want to give up their pounds here, okay, because American goods are going to seem cheaper to UK citizens. Okay, so the UK citizens will offer more pounds to get more dollars. All right. The other side of this here is, again, that if there's a depreciation in the pound, that is, it gets cheaper, then British goods seem cheaper to Americans. So Americans will want more pounds. That is, they'll demand more pounds. Now, there's a reflection here, if you will, between the supply and the demand for these currencies. You're going to see here, because it takes citizens of two different countries to exchange in the Forex market, that the private demand for, I'm glad I'm writing here, so reading as I write or speaking so you can read my writing here. But the private demand for pounds is really the same thing as the private supply of dollars. Okay, so when I write this thing here, private demand for pounds, that's really the same thing, or driven by the private supply of dollars. Okay, the quantity, so again, we have a world here with two countries in it, America and the United Kingdom. So the dollars supplied to Forex market is driving the demand for pounds. So I'm going to put an arrow here because I mean the quantity. The thing is, if this goes up, this goes up. They move together. Okay, again, the quantity of each may not be exactly the same, but they move together. Okay, and likewise, the private demand for dollars is driven by the private demand for pounds. Okay. All right. So, if you want to convert a certain quantity of pounds to dollars, you're going to use the appropriate exchange rate, and that's could change in this world in which we live from day to day because we live in what's called a post Bretton Woods world. Okay, so this sounds kind of like it's coming out of nowhere, but I wanted to insert that here for a minute. I, I don't remember what year it was, but it was like 1971, I think. I should have looked this up. It's either 71 or 73. It doesn't really matter. But up until that time, from World War II up until the early 70s, we had what were called fixed exchange rates in the world. Really, this was part of what's called the Bretton Woods system. Okay, so let me take the word post out of here first. The Bretton Woods system was one of those post World War II systems that the Western powers who won the war decided to put into effect, along with the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, ultimately the World Trading Organization, which at that time was called GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. But these were post-World War II organizations that came about to stabilize the political and economic systems of the world. You even had NATO and so forth in the wake of that. And so this was a system to stabilize the economies because it was recognized that one source of political instability that led to World War II was the hyperinflation in Germany. You also had hyperinflation in Hungary and other countries in Europe, but it was especially severe in Germany. And so it was decided that, okay, it's good if we do the following. You have an ounce of gold. By the way, the Wizard of Oz, Oz stands for ounce of gold. And that whole little play about the Wizard of Oz is an allegory about the gold standard of over 100 years ago, a quarter and a century ago, and the political debate about that I'll just mention. But at any rate, I digress. But an ounce of gold was pegged to the dollar, or the dollar was the US dollar, USD, was pegged to gold. I believe it was $32 an ounce. I'd have to go back and look. I guess I should have done my homework on this, but it doesn't matter. You guys can look this up. But it doesn't really matter for what I'm going to say here. The US dollar was pegged to a certain amount of gold. I'd like to buy gold at $32 an ounce today. You can't do that. And then the other currencies of the world, okay? So like the pound sterling and the yen, okay? And so forth. All your other currencies here, major currencies of the world. At the time, the lira and the franc and so forth. These things were pegged to the dollar. So there was fixed exchange rates between these currencies here and the US dollar, which itself was pegged to gold. We had a lot of gold in the United States of Fort Knox and so forth. So we had a system whereby the central banks in these countries here could exchange their dollars for gold. Now, the citizens of those countries, and certainly the citizens of the United States, could not do that. So it was not a pure gold standard that you would have in a case like that. where every dollar a citizen can trade in for gold. No, but the central banks of these countries could exchange. So that's called a gold exchange system. So we had in place from World War II to the early 1970s what's called the Bretton Woods system. The system was set up in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. All the big finance ministers of the world got together there and agreed to this. This seemed to be a stable way, making sure there was no hyperinflation anywhere and so forth. But along come the 70s in the U.S., during the administration of Richard Nixon, was fighting two wars at the time. You may not be aware of that, but there were two wars going on. There was the Vietnam War, okay, everybody knows that. And then there was what was called the War on Poverty, okay. So both of those were very costly initiatives initiatives, programs of the federal government. The war in Southeast Asia certainly was, but all this required the U.S. ultimately to print a lot of money. I mean, we had to fund a lot of projects. And so the Federal Reserve started printing a lot of dollars. Well, if those dollars are all backed by gold, then you got a problem here, right? And in fact, the problem did crop up, especially with France. Central Bank of France said, hey, we got all these dollars in our vaults at our central bank. Let's trade these in for gold. And they saw dollars piling up everywhere in the world because we were printing dollars. And so to finance these two wars. And so they threatened to, in fact, they began to trade their dollars in for gold. And Nixon saw, hey, we can't afford to do this. So this linkage here was broken. Okay, the dollar was no longer exchangeable for gold. And consequently, we went off of fixed exchange rates between all the major powers of the world. So what we have now is called a floating rate system, floating rates, floating exchange rates. And this has been in place ever since the early 70s. You can go back and look at when Bretton Woods was nullified or came to an end. And so every day, and it's really a market that changes on a minute to minute basis. This is called a Forex market, foreign exchange market. There's, again, actually trillions of dollars worth of currencies traded every day, but on all these markets. So for instance, this is one we're looking at where we're pricing the pound here in terms of the dollar. Okay, so it's how many dollars does it cost to buy a pound. So the exchange rate that we're working with here, which is a direct exchange rate for an American citizen, you got dollars per pound, is what we are looking at in the market for pounds. But you have other markets as well. Okay, you have the market for yen and the market for euro now and so forth. So all these other markets, and the yen is priced in euros and so forth. So you got lots of different markets that are working together. Okay, so this is kind of the context of what we're talking about here with exchange rates, a little historical background for you, I think. I hope that helps. So now you know what the Forex market is. We have floating exchange rates. I will say that your smaller countries in the developing world, not in the developed world, we have floating exchange rates between all the major economies of the world, but there are developing countries that will have a fixed or some sort of managed exchange rate system. And in China, the PRC, People's Republic of China, is kind of in another category as well, where they manipulate the value of their currency in foreign exchange markets. You see that you can increase your exports, which is a good thing, increase your exports and decrease your imports. That is, remember, exports minus imports gives you net exports. That's a component of gross domestic product. That can be increased by making your exports seem cheaper to foreigners. So how would you do that? Or make other people's exports into your country, so imports into your country look expensive. So let me put that on let me show you again what I'm talking about on the camera here again. If the goal is to increase gross domestic product, and this should look familiar to you guys, C plus, I can't write and speak at the same time. I'm sorry. C plus I plus G. Consumption plus investment plus government expenditures and net exports. These are your components of gross domestic product. And net exports is exports minus imports. So if you want to drive up your exports and drive down your imports so that you increase net exports and thus increase gross domestic product, actually imports here, I will say, is accounted for over here in consumption as well. There's actually offsetting import figures here. I'll just say that when you consume a Toyota in the United States, if it was made overseas, it's an import. So it becomes that particular import, that import becomes part of consumption. And that's why we subtract imports over here to take out of consumption those goods we consume from overseas. So in GDP, gross domestic product, we want to include only goods and services that are made here. So we only want to add in those in consumption, really, those that were made here. So, well, at any rate, it's easy to just add up gross consumption figures here, and that includes a lot of imports. So we take imports out here. It's an adjustment. But so this may be your goal here, simply to increase exports so as to boost your gross domestic product. Well, how do you do that? You make your exports appear cheap, okay, to foreigners. You want to make your exports cheap. Well, if you're a Great Brit, and you got this Jaguar here, you got this you want to export a bunch of Jaguars to boost up UK gross domestic product. That Jaguar is going to be priced in pounds. So I don't know how much a Jaguar. It's a pretty nice car. Let's just say it's probably not this expensive. We just say it's 100,000 pounds. Okay, so there's a couple, maybe over a period of time. There's $2 per pound, and there's $1 per pound. Okay, so just think about how much this Jaguar is going to cost an American. What's an American going to pay? Okay, here an American would pay $200,000, right? Okay, pounds canceled. Here the American is only going to pay, multiply these two, $100,000. Okay, so what you see is that the Jaguar seems cheaper to an American at this exchange rate. So what's happening here is if you can somehow, if you can achieve a depreciation of your currencies. Remember, this is a Brit here. This is a UK citizen. So if the value of the pound can drop from $2 to $1, you're going to export more goods and services. Okay. Now, in a floating exchange rate system, this movement here, a lot of this is beyond the ability of the government or central bank to affect. But in some countries, and I'll talk about the PRC here just in a minute and how they actually achieve this, the People's Republic of China and so forth, but how they achieve it's a subject of another lecture. But if somehow you can make your currency cheaper on the foreign exchange markets, you're going to boost your exports. That is, if you can depreciate, if your currency depreciates, okay, if the domestic currency depreciates, then exports are going to increase. Okay. And if exports increase, that means more jobs and so forth, more wealth domestically and so forth. Okay. So there's a deliberate policy on the part of people in the Republic of China to keep their currency cheaper than it really would be if they were playing by the same rules as the rest of the world that is really operating on a free foreign exchange market. If the market for Chinese yuan were really a free, unfettered market, then they would not be exporting as much as they are, because the government there has been keeping their exchange rate, dollars per yuan, at an artificially low level. All right, so hopefully that makes sense to you, and it might be part of a system that not only the PRC, but countries that do manipulate their exchange rate. We'll talk about in the next chapter instances where that may happen. But the purpose would be, again, to affect an increase in output through an increase in exports by that country. Okay, so now what I want to do is talk just a little bit about the mechanics of shifting supply and demand for foreign exchange. So again, we're going to go back to this market, say for the UK pound in terms of the dollar. So we're going to price the pound in terms of the dollar. This supply and demand curve we just pointed out, and we're going to look at what happens to the exchange rate when something shifts one side of that market. So let's go to the camera. Okay, so let's talk again about the market, MKT, for UK pounds. Okay, so here is supply and demand. Here's the supply, and there's the demand. We'll talk about the private supply and the private demand for pounds. So this is the notation here. You could extend that to dollars and what have you. So here's the price of the pound. So this is going to be an exchange rate where we're going to have dollars on top and pounds on the bottom. Okay, dollars on top, pounds on the bottom. So this is the form for the exchange rate. And so maybe there's equilibrium here at this point. We'll talk about why there would be equilibrium in a minute. But suppose this equilibrium exists at $2 per pound. And for some reason, there's an increased supply of pounds. So remember, an increased supply of pounds, I'll put a prime here, is increased supply is always a right shift. Like an increased demand is a right shift. Don't shift up and down, shift left and right. Because again, in economics, you got the independent variable on the y-axis, not on the x-axis. Okay, so we got the quantity of pounds here. So what is this representing? An increased supply of pounds. So with an increased supply of pounds, guess what? The equilibrium now is going to be down here. So what's the net result? Well, initially there's an excess supply of pounds. And like with anything else, if there's an excess supply, then the invisible hand is going to be at work. And the price of this is going to be bid downward to a new price, a lower price. So maybe this is $1 per pound or 1.5. Let's say it's let's make it 1.50. Okay, 1.5 per pound. So is this an appreciation or depreciation? Well, the pound has depreciated. Okay, it's lost value. The pound has depreciated. The dollar correspondingly has appreciated. So you can say it either way, really. Either the pound has depreciated or the dollar has appreciated. In fact, we can look at the market for dollars that corresponds to this. Again, remember, our world has only two countries in it. And I said just a moment ago that the demand for pounds is driven by the supply of dollars, and the supply of pounds, which is the one we just shifted, driven by the demand for dollars. Okay, so I'm going to show you how this works here. Okay, so I'm going to go back here. And here we shifted the supply. We had an increase in the supply of pounds to the foreign exchange market. Well, guess what? That's got to correspond to an increase in the demand for dollars, right? So if we go here to the market for dollars, and I just draw my supply and demand curve here, this is going to be the private supply of dollars and the private demand for dollars. And again, we're in the market for dollars. So if you think about this, this is the price for dollars, not for pounds. So we could look here at the exchange between dollars and pounds, but we're going to price dollars like we would price gasoline. The commodity goes on the bottom. So here I'm going to put dollars down here, and this is going to be pounds. Okay, so this is the market for dollars. So we're treating this as the commodity. If it were gasoline, it would be so many units of currency per gallon of gasoline. Okay, over here, the commodity, if you will, is pounds. So we had dollars per pound instead of dollars per gallon of gasoline. So I hope that makes sense to you, okay? But at any rate, what we said here just a moment ago is that an increase in the supply of pounds corresponds to an increase in the demand for dollars. So now the dollars, private demand for dollars is over here. So what's happening here? Well, initially, at this point right here where things began, there were $2 for each pound, or 1 pound per $2. 1 per 2, that sounds like 0.5 pounds per dollar. Okay, when I say $2 per pound, that's the same thing as saying a half a pound per dollar, is it not? Okay, so again, in this format here for the price of this commodity here, we began initially at half a pound per dollar. And just as there was a right shift or increase in supply of pounds here, there's an increase in the demand for dollars. So when there's a excess supply of pounds, there's going to be an excess supply or demand for dollars. Okay, and excess demand for dollars results because there's, it's a mirror reflection of there being an excess supply of pounds. People in Great Britain are bringing their pounds to market, and they want to give up those pounds for these things here, dollars. So the invisible hand in the face of this excess demand is going to drive up the price for dollars. So now instead of there being, this $2 per pound or a half a pound per dollar, the price of a dollar drifts up to where $1.50 is equal to a pound. So I have to take the reciprocal of 1.5. So let me do that real quick. I had to go get my calculator. Took me a while to find it. Okay, but remember the new exchange rate for the market for pounds was $1.5 per pound. So you're going to reciprocate that, okay, to get the prices we want to stay here. So 1 divided by 1.5. What in the world is that? 0.66 repeating 6. I guess I knew that. 2/3. So let's go back and label this. Okay, I don't think I was recording, so let me go back here. Okay, increase in demand for pounds, in summary, can result from it will look like this, and that will result in an increase in the price of pounds in terms of dollars. So that would be called an appreciation of the pound. And here, if you have an increase in the supply of dollars, which will occur if there's an increase in the demand for pounds, an increase in the supply of dollars will drive down the price of dollars. And we say that the dollar has depreciated. Do not use the term devaluate. The devaluation is an intentional move on the part of a central bank, so forth. This is the result of market forces. These are markets. So we may talk about this later. People tend to use this word instead of this word, but do not use this word for what's resulting in free foreign exchange markets. Use the word appreciate or depreciate. Okay, so I'm going to bring this home here a little bit by relating this to what we've talked about previously with balance of payments. So when we talked about balance of payments in a previous video, and we said that, okay, balance of payments, it consists of a current account balance plus a financial account balance plus official settlements balance. And we said this is equal to zero, okay? And so, this is where you have goods and services traded. Uh, you know, and this is where you have assets traded. We use the capital account is in here as well, but we just use financial account balance here. This is the trade in assets. Most of these are financial assets, stocks and bonds, treasuries and so forth, treasury bills and bonds. But it can include other types of investment as well. But this is the private part of the balance of payments, okay? A lot of times, even though all of this is called the balance of payments, the balance of payments identically is equal to zero, okay? Because of a law of debits and credits. For every debit, there's a credit. Remember, if you have a debit in one of these two accounts or in any account that involves an outflow of the domestic currency, that's a debit, okay? Accountants might resist that explanation a little bit, but at any rate, when you have an outflow of cash, then you may have actually debited some other asset account or debited a liability account. Okay, so that's the idea. Don't think of the cash account itself, but for anyone else who's not really a hardcore accountant, just think again: debits, outflow of the domestic currency, credits, what results in an inflow. So if you export goods and services or assets, those would be credits because you're going to bring in the domestic currency. And so forth. Now, this is actions of the central bank to sell, say, gold or whatever. So you got gold and you got other currencies, and we talked about this. And so those can be traded for the domestic currency as well. So at any rate, because of debits and credits, this is always going to equal to zero. It's an identically equal to zero. All right. But it's a little unfortunate, but a lot of times people, when they talk about balance of payments, like in the news and so forth, they're referring to this part, not the whole thing, but this part, the current account balance, which is mostly trade. So when we talk about the trade balance, exports and imports, goods and services, that's in the current account. There are other things too, though. There's interest income, say, on investments, interest income, not the investments themselves, but interest income. It would be part of the current account balance and so forth. But goods and services are part of the trade balance, which is a lion's share of the current account balance. And then the financial account balance, this is where you're buying and selling assets themselves. It may in turn earn interest and other income, okay? But it's unfortunate that in the news, a lot of people get a little sloppy with their language, and when they say balance of payments, oh, we're running a balance of payments surplus or deficit, then they're talking about these two components of the balance of payments. And so we could call this the private components of the balance of payment. And this is the public over here. So these different terms that you hear in the news, I want you to know kind of with a little more precision what people are talking about. A lot of times we get alarmed by the fact that there may be a balance of payments deficit in our country. There could be. There won't be, though, generally speaking, if you have flexible exchange rates. There never will be because of this reason here, okay? And when you have purely flexible exchange rates, we don't do anything with the official settlements balance. And so this kind of drops out and this is equal to zero. But I'm just saying here that when you talk about nations in general and those with different exchange rate regimes, maybe they peg their currency and so forth, you can have a balance of payments surplus or deficit. Okay. So any rate, let's just think about, say, the current account or what have you. You could have an excess supply of goods and services. Why might that exist? Say you have UK citizens, just between these two countries buying uh, U.S. goods, U.S. goods. Oh, my handwriting's terrible. U.S. goods. So we're exporting more to the United Kingdom than they're exporting to us. Just say there's net exports. Now, across all countries, it may be zero, that some of these two, but with respect to a particular country, like China, I'll tell you that we have a current account balance deficit with China. No question about it. This is negative with respect to China. Okay, the sum of these two, though, is close to zero with respect to China because we're selling or we're buying Chinese goods, but we're selling American assets to China. Okay, and they offset each other. So this is close to zero with respect to China, but each of these components can be way off. So they're gobbling up assets here. They're buying US treasuries like crazy. They're a major holder of US treasuries. Why is that? It's because we're buying Chinese goods. So dollars are flowing out of the country because we're buying Chinese goods. That's a current account balance. You might also have a current account balance with the United Kingdom, say, in which case, I mean, you could have a current account balance, current account surplus or deficit. Okay. So let's think about what would result in this case here. See if we can figure this out, where we have the private supply of pounds exceeding the private demand for pounds. Okay. And when I say private, I'm talking about this here. So this could be positive or negative. Okay. With respect to the United Kingdom from the US. You got all these other countries involved too, so that this is going to equal zero and a floating exchange rate system. But with respect to the United Kingdom, the sum of these two could be positive or negative. So let's suppose that the pound is high enough, say $2 per pound, so that there is an excess supply or private excess supply of pounds. Okay, so this is private. Okay. Now, why might that be? It's because UK citizens want to buy American stuff. That is to say, there is a UK balance of payments deficit, at least in our simple world here, where there's only two countries, the US and the United Kingdom. The US wants to buy US goods. So the balance of payments, when I say that, Great Britain, again, that's the current account balance and the financial account balance, it's less than zero. There's a deficit. Okay, so when a country runs a balance payments deficit, this is the case, current account plus the financial accounts less than zero. This is a situation, there's an excess supply of their domestic currency on the foreign exchange market. And when that happens, the invisible hand creeps in and drives the price of the domestic currency down so that it depreciates. So maybe now it falls to $1.5, $1.50 per pound. Okay, per pound. So it was $2 a pound. Ooh, that's a lot for a pound. Now it's $1.50. So you have what's going to happen is there's an depreciation of their currency, the domestic currency. So the pound here depreciates. Now, think about this just a second. We'll get more into this later, but a balance of payments deficit is generally the result of an excess supply of your currency on the Forex market. So that domestic currency depreciates, it gets cheaper. Okay. Now, think about this is kind of a neat thing about a floating exchange rate system around the world. A BO balance of payments deficit basically means UK is a net importer, right? They're importing goods and services. They're importing goods and services. And so they're paying with pounds, the Forex market, so that causes this excess supply of pounds. But guess what happens? The price of their currency falls. When the price of their currency falls, then the price of UK goods is going to fall on international markets. So that Jaguar is going to get cheaper. That Jaguar. So Americans are going to go, I think I'll buy that Jaguar. So the UK may switch from being a net importer to being at least less of a net importer. Okay. Or is to say the UK begins to export more goods and services. So what's neat here about floating exchange rates is the magic of the invisible hand, if you will. If they're allowed to operate and central banks really don't get involved and so forth, then over time, a balance of payments deficit can be corrected. Likewise, a balance of payments surplus will correct too as the domestic currency appreciates. Well, I hope this is helpful to us tonight. It's important to me that you have an understanding of how these things work. And it's nothing difficult here. I think one thing that helps with floating exchange rates, we'll talk about fixed exchange rates later. That's coming a little bit later. But most of the world operates in this post-Bretton Woods world. And you think of currencies as any other commodity. And so if you're looking at the market for yen or pounds or euro, what have you, you want to price those in the domestic currency, you're going to use our direct exchange rate. And basically it's the supply and demand curves as you would have for any other commodity. Okay, so I hope that helps. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.